The hammer struck the nail wrong, sending it flying across the nursery. James Renard cursed under his breath and sucked on his thumb where the hammer had caught it. Blood welled up from the cut. "Having trouble in there?" Mary called from the hallway. "Just finishing up the shelves," James called back, wiping blood on his work shirt. The shelves were for books, toys, all the things their daughter would need as she grew up. He bought the wood himself, measured twice, cut once, like his grandfather had taught him. Mary appeared in the doorway. Phone pressed to her ear. She held up one finger, the universal sign for wait, and continued her conversation. "No, I told you, the color needs to be perfect," she said into the phone. "This is for my baby shower. Everything has to be exactly right." James went back to hammering, trying to ignore the edge in his wife's voice. Mary had always cared about appearances, but lately it felt like she cared about nothing else. The house had to be perfect. Her clothes had to be perfect. Her life had to look perfect to everyone watching. "That sounds wonderful. Sandra," Mary continued. "Yes, I'll be there at 3. "No, James has to work. He's always working." James set down his hammer. Mary made it sound like he chose to work long hours, like he enjoyed crawling through hot attics and fixing broken air conditioners because it was fun. He worked overtime because babies were expensive, because he wanted to provide for his family. "I'll see you later," Mary said, ending the call. She turned to James with that smile she'd perfected, bright but empty. "How are the shelves coming?" "Almost done. Just need to mount them to the wall." Mary walked into the room, running her hand along the crib rail. "The baby shower is this weekend. Sandra's handling most of the details, but I need to be there to supervise." "What time is it?" "I might be able to come by after work." "It's a ladies' lunch, James. Men don't come to baby showers." "Some men do. I've seen pictures." "Not my baby shower." Mary's voice had that final quality that meant the discussion was over. "Besides, you'd just be uncomfortable. All that talk about babies and pregnancy and women's things." James wanted to point out that this was his baby too, that he might enjoy talking about pregnancy and preparing for fatherhood. But Mary had already moved on, checking her phone again. "I have errands to run," she said. "The grocery store, then the bank, then I need to pick up the invitations for the shower." "Want me to come with you?" "I'm done here for today." "That's okay. You just slow me down." Mary kissed his cheek quickly, the kind of kiss you give a relative you don't particularly like. "There's leftover casserole in the fridge for dinner." She left him standing in the nursery, surrounded by the smell of fresh paint and new wood. James looked around at everything he'd built, the shelves, the changing table, the rocking chair he'd bought at a garage sale, and refinished himself. Everything ready for their daughter, Grace. They decided on the name 3 months ago, after his grandmother who'd raised him and his brother Hank after their parents died in a car accident. Mary had agreed to it easily, which surprised him. Usually she had opinions about everything. "Grace Elizabeth Renard," James said aloud, testing how it sounded. "Good. Strong. A name for a girl who would grow up, knowing she was loved." His phone buzzed with a text from Hank. "Beer tonight? Jenny's working late." James typed back, "Can't. Mary's got plans, and someone needs to work on the nursery." "You work too much, little brother. Baby's coming in 6 weeks. Want everything ready. It's ready now. You've been ready for months. Take a break." But James couldn't take a break. Not when there were still things to do, improvements to make. The ceiling fan needed installing. The windows needed better locks. The baseboards needed touching up where he dinged them moving furniture. He heard Mary's car start in the driveway, then the sound of tires on gravel as she backed out. Through the nursery window, he watched her silver Honda disappear down the street. She'd been going out more lately. Errands that took hours. Phone calls with friends he'd never met. Time spent away from home, away from him. James told himself it was normal. Women nested differently than men. Maybe Mary needed space to prepare mentally for motherhood. Maybe he was being too clingy, too involved. But the doubt gnawed at him as he mounted the shelves to the wall. Something had changed in their marriage over the past few months. Mary looked at him differently now, like she was measuring him against some standard and finding him wanting. At dinner that night, Mary picked at her food while scrolling through her phone. "How were your errands?" James asked. "Fine." She didn't look up from the screen. "Get everything done?" "Mostly. James waited for more details, but Mary seemed absorbed in whatever she was reading. He tried a different approach. I was thinking we should take a birthing class. The hospital offers them on weekends. I already know how to give birth, James. Women have been doing it for thousands of years. I know, but they teach the partners how to help. What to expect, what to do if something goes wrong. Nothing's going to go wrong. Mary's voice was sharp. Stop being so paranoid. I'm not paranoid. I just want to be prepared. You want to be in control. You want to plan everything and organize everything and make sure it all happens exactly how you think it should. James set down his fork. I want to be a good father. You think taking a class makes you a good father? You think reading books and building furniture makes you a good father? What makes a good father, then? Mary looked at him for a long moment, and James saw something cold in her eyes, something that made his stomach clench. I don't know, she said finally, but I don't think it's something you can learn from a book. That night, James lay awake listening to Mary breathe beside him. She'd been asleep for hours, but he couldn't stop thinking about her words. What had she meant? That he wasn't cut out to be a father? That all his planning and preparation was pointless? He'd never doubted himself about many things, but fatherhood terrified him. His own father had died when James was 7, too young to learn much about being a man, let alone being a dad. His grandfather had tried to fill that role, but farming and raising boys were different skills. James had learned about work ethic and responsibility and keeping your word. He'd learned to fix things with his hands and solve problems with persistence. But he'd never learned how to be the kind of father a little girl would need. Maybe Mary saw that. Maybe she looked at him and saw all the ways he'd fall short, all the things he couldn't give their daughter. Maybe that's why she'd been so distant lately. The thought kept him awake until dawn. 3 weeks later, James got the call at work. He was replacing a compressor on a commercial unit downtown when his phone rang. James! Mary's voice was tight with pain. I think it's time. James dropped his tools. Time? But you're not due for 6 weeks early. I know, but the contractions started an hour ago, and they're getting stronger. I'm coming home. Call the doctor. I already did. She said to meet her at the hospital. James made the 20-minute drive in 12 minutes, racing through yellow lights and taking corners too fast. He found Mary in their bedroom, sitting on the edge of the bed with her hands pressed against her belly. How far apart are the contractions? He asked. 4 minutes. Maybe less. Mary's face was pale, sweat beading on her forehead. James, what if something's wrong? What if the baby's not ready? The baby will be fine. You'll both be fine. James helped her stand, grabbed the hospital bag they'd packed weeks ago. Let's go have her daughter. The drive to Nashville General Hospital passed in a blur of traffic lights, and Mary gripping his hand so hard he thought she might break his fingers. By the time they reached the emergency room, her contractions were 2 minutes apart. I need a wheelchair, James told the desk clerk. Name? Renard. Mary Renard. She's having a baby. The clerk moved with practiced efficiency, calling for a wheelchair and summoning an orderly. Within minutes, Mary was being wheeled toward the maternity ward while James filled out paperwork with shaking hands. Insurance card, the admissions clerk said. James fumbled for his wallet. She's 6 weeks early. Is that bad? I mean, how early is too early? 34 weeks is considered moderate preterm, the clerk said kindly. Most babies do very well at that stage. The doctors will take good care of her. James nodded, trying to absorb the information. Moderate preterm. Most babies do well. He clung to those words as he signed forms and answered questions about medical history and emergency contacts. By the time he was allowed into Mary's room, she was already hooked up to monitors and IVs. A nurse in blue scrubs was checking the baby's heartbeat with a Doppler. Strong, steady rhythm, the nurse announced. This little one sounds like a fighter. Dr. Peterson, Mary's obstetrician, arrived 20 minutes later. She was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and gentle hands who'd been delivering babies for 30 years. How are we doing, Mary? She asked, washing her hands at the sink. Scared, Mary admitted. It's too early. 34 weeks isn't ideal, but it's not dangerous either. Babies born at this stage typically do very well with minimal intervention. Dr. Peterson sat on the edge of the bed. Let me check your progress. The examination was quick and professional. You're at 5 centimeters, Dr. Peterson announced. This baby is definitely coming today. James felt his knees go weak. Today. They were going to meet their daughter today. Is there anything we should be worried about? He asked. Premature babies sometimes need help with breathing or feeding, but most of those issues resolve quickly. We'll have a NICU team standing by just in case, but I expect this to be a straightforward delivery. The next 6 hours blurred together. James held Mary's hand through contractions, fed her iced chips when she was thirsty, and tried to ignore the growing pain in his lower back from standing beside the bed. Mary's labor progressed steadily, but slowly, each contraction bringing their daughter closer to the world. Dr. Wells arrived during the afternoon. He was younger than James had expected, maybe late 30s, with an easy smile and confident manner. Mary's face brightened when he walked into the room. "Adrian," she said, "you came." "Of course I came. I told you I'd be here for the delivery." Dr. Wells shook James's hand. "You must be the proud father. I'm Adrian Wells, pediatrics. I'll be taking care of your daughter once she arrives." "Nice to meet you," James said, though something about the doctor's familiarity with Mary bothered him. When had they discussed him being present for the delivery? "Mary's told me so much about you," Dr. Wells continued. "She says you've been working night and day to get ready for this baby. Just want everything to be perfect for her. That's admirable. Not all fathers are so involved." Dr. Wells stayed for 10 minutes, checking Mary's chart and discussing the delivery plan with Dr. Peterson. He was professional and knowledgeable, but James noticed how Mary watched him, how her whole demeanor changed when he was in the room. "He seems nice," James said after Dr. Wells left. "He's wonderful, very caring. He really listens when you talk to him." "When have you been talking to him?" Mary shifted uncomfortably. "He consulted on my case a few months ago, when they thought there might be complications." "What complications?" "You never mentioned complications." "It was nothing, just some elevated protein levels. Everything turned out fine." James wanted to ask more questions, but Mary's next contraction hit, and she squeezed his hand so hard he forgot everything else. Grace Elizabeth Renard was born at 6:23 p.m., weighing 4 pounds, 7 ounces. She was tiny and red and perfect, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to look right at James when the nurse placed her on Mary's chest. "Hello, beautiful," Mary whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Hello, my perfect girl." James touched Grace's tiny hand, marveling at how her fingers automatically closed around his thumb. She was so small, so fragile, but there was something fierce in her grip that made his heart swell with pride. "She's incredible," he said. "She is," Mary agreed. For a moment, she looked at James with something like her old warmth. "We made something beautiful, didn't we?" "We did." Dr. Wells examined Grace while James and Mary watched anxiously. He listened to her heart and lungs, checked her reflexes, measured her head circumference. "Everything looks good," he announced. "She's small but healthy. We'll keep her in a NICU overnight for observation, but I expect she'll be ready to go home in a few days." "Can I hold her again?" Mary asked. "Of course." Dr. Wells placed Grace back in Mary's arms, and James watched his wife's face transform. All the hardness and distance of the past few months melted away, replaced by pure maternal love. "I'm sorry," Mary said quietly, not looking at James. "I'm sorry I've been so difficult lately. I was scared. Scared of being a mother. Scared of changing. Scared of everything." "You don't have to apologize." "I do. You've been nothing but supportive, and I've been horrible to you. I promise I'll do better." James kissed her forehead. "We're going to be fine. All three of us." But even as he said the words, James noticed Dr. Wells watching them from across the room, his expression unreadable. The NICU was a maze of incubators and monitors, each one housing a tiny human fighting to grow strong enough for the outside world. Grace's isolette was in the corner, surrounded by machines that tracked her heart rate, breathing, and oxygen levels. "She's doing beautifully," the NICU nurse told James. Her name was Nora, a woman in her early 40s with gentle hands and a Tennessee accent. "Breathing on her own, temperature stable, good strong suck reflex. She's ahead of where most 34-weekers are at this stage." James spent the night in a chair beside Grace's isolette, watching her sleep. Every few hours, Nora would check her vitals and adjust her feeding tube, but mostly Grace just slept the deep sleep of newborns. Mary had been moved to a recovery room, exhausted from labor. James split his time between them, making sure Mary had everything she needed while staying close to Grace. "You should go home and sleep," Mary said the next morning. "You look awful." "I'm fine. I want to be here." "James, she's sleeping. There's nothing for you to do. I want to be here when she wakes up." Mary studied his face for a moment. "You really love her, don't you?" "Of course I love her. She's our daughter." "No, I mean really love her. Like she's the most important thing in your world." James thought about it. "Yeah, I guess she is." "Good," Mary said, but her tone was strange. "That's good." Dr. Wells stopped by twice that day, checking on Grace's progress and answering James's endless questions about feeding schedules and sleep patterns and developmental milestones. The doctor was patient and thorough, but James still felt uncomfortable around him. "Is there something between you and Dr. Wells?" James asked Mary during one of his visits to her room. "What do you mean?" "I mean the way you two interact. Like you know each other better than just doctor and patient." Mary's face flushed. "Don't be ridiculous. He's a doctor. I'm his patient's mother. We're friendly because he's taking good care of our daughter. It seems like you're being paranoid again, just like with the birthing classes and the baby proofing and everything else. You see problems where there aren't any." James wanted to argue, but Mary looked exhausted and he didn't want to stress her while she was recovering. Maybe he was being paranoid. Maybe new fathers always felt territorial about their families. On Grace's third day of life, James arrived at the hospital to find Dr. Wells in the NICU, holding her while she took a bottle. "She's a good eater," Dr. Wells said, not looking up from Grace's face. "Strong suck reflex, good coordination. All good signs for a preemie. Can I feed her?" "Of course." Dr. Wells handed Grace to James carefully. "Support her head. Let her set the pace. She'll let you know when she's had enough." James settled into the rocking chair and watched Grace's eyes flutter open as she drank. She looked right at him, and he could swear she recognized him. "She knows you," Dr. Wells said. "Babies bond with their primary caregivers very quickly. I've been here every day since she was born. That's obvious. She's lucky to have such a devoted father." There was something in the doctor's tone that made James look up. Dr. Wells was watching him with an expression that might have been sadness or guilt or something else entirely. "Is everything okay with Grace?" James asked. "Everything's fine. She's healthy and strong and beautiful." Dr. Wells paused. "You're a good man, James. Grace is lucky to have you." The comment struck James as odd, but before he could respond, Dr. Wells had left the NICU. That afternoon, the hospital discharged Mary. The plan was for her to go home and rest while Grace stayed in the NICU for a few more days. James would continue his vigil at the hospital until Grace was ready to come home. "You don't have to stay here every night," Mary said as James walked her to the car. "The nurses will call if anything changes. I want to be here. She shouldn't be alone." Mary stopped walking and turned to face him. "James, she's not alone. There are nurses with her around the clock. Doctors checking on her constantly. She's probably getting better care here than she would at home." "I know, but you don't trust anyone else to take care of her properly. Just like you don't trust me to handle the baby shower or the nursery, decorating, or anything else." "That's not true, isn't it? You second-guess everything I do. You hover over every decision. You act like you're the only person who cares about this baby." James felt the accusation hit like a slap. "I don't mean to do that, but you do. And it makes me feel like you think I'm incompetent. Like you don't trust me to be a good mother." "Mary, that's not. I'm tired, James. I just want to go home and sleep in my own bed. Can you please just take me home?" The drive passed in silence. James helped Mary into the house and made sure she had everything she needed, then headed back to the hospital. But her words stayed with him, gnawing at his confidence. Maybe he was being overprotective. Maybe his need to control everything was pushing Mary away instead of bringing them closer together. Maybe being a good father meant learning to trust other people with his daughter's care. That night, James decided to go home and sleep in his own bed. Grace was stable and healthy, surrounded by medical professionals who knew far more about premature baby care than he did. Mary was right. He needed to learn to let go. He kissed Grace goodnight and promised to return first thing in the morning. It was the last time he saw his daughter alive. The call came at 4:47 a.m. James woke to his phone ringing, Mary's name on the screen. James, you need to get to the hospital right now. What's wrong? It's Grace. Something happened. They called me an hour ago, but I couldn't. I can't. Mary was crying, her words broken and unclear. James was already pulling on clothes, his heart hammering against his ribs. What happened, Mary? Is she okay? Just get here. Please. I need you here. James made the drive to the hospital in 8 minutes, running red lights and taking corners on 2 wheels. He found Mary in the NICU waiting room, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Where is she? James demanded. Room 3. With the doctors. They won't let me see her. James pushed through the NICU doors and found a team of medical personnel surrounding Grace's isolette. Dr. Wells was performing CPR on her tiny body while machines beeped and alarms sounded. What happened? James asked. Nobody answered. The medical team worked with desperate efficiency, injecting medications and checking monitors and trying to restart a heart that had simply stopped beating. James watched his daughter's lifeless body and felt his world collapse. They worked on Grace for 43 minutes before Dr. Wells finally stepped back and checked his watch. Time of death, 5:21 a.m. The words hit James like a physical blow. He staggered backward, caught himself against the wall. What happened? He managed. Dr. Wells pulled off his latex gloves, his face grim. Grace went into cardiac arrest around 4 a.m. The night nurse found her unresponsive during routine checks. We did everything we could, but her organs had already started shutting down. Why? She was fine yesterday. She was eating, responding. Everything was normal. Sometimes with premature babies, complications develop rapidly. Grace had an underlying genetic condition that caused her organs to fail. It's rare, but it happens. Genetic condition? What genetic condition? Nobody said anything about genetic problems. We're still running tests, but the preliminary results suggest a metabolic disorder, something that affects how the body processes certain enzymes. It often doesn't present symptoms until after birth. James felt like he was drowning. Could we have prevented this? If we'd known earlier. There's nothing anyone could have done, Dr. Wells said firmly. These conditions are random, unpredictable. It's not anyone's fault. But James heard something in the doctor's voice, saw something in his eyes that didn't match his words. Dr. Wells looked guilty. I want to see her, James said. Of course. Grace lay in her isolette, looking peaceful and perfect except for being completely still. Her tiny chest no longer rose and fell. Her perfect little fingers were curled into fists. James touched her hand and felt how cold she was. Grace, he whispered. Daddy's here. Daddy's so sorry he wasn't here when you needed him. He stayed with her for 2 hours, holding her hand and talking to her about all the things they would never do together. The books he would never read to her. The first steps he would never see. The wedding he would never walk her down the aisle for. When he finally left the NICU, he found Mary in the hallway, talking on her phone. I have to go, she said quickly, ending the call. How are you holding up? How do you think I'm holding up? Our daughter just died. I know. I'm devastated too. But we have to be strong. James stared at his wife. She looked sad, but not devastated. She looked like someone who had expected this. The funeral home needs to be called, Mary continued. And we need to decide about cremation versus burial. And there are forms to fill out for the death certificate. How can you think about that stuff right now? Because someone has to. Because life goes on even when we don't want it to. James wanted to scream at her, to shake her, to make her understand that their daughter was dead and nothing else mattered. But he was too broken, too lost in grief to fight. They buried Grace Elizabeth Renard on a gray February morning in Mount Olivet Cemetery. The funeral was small, James's mother and brother, a few friends from work, Mary's parents who drove down from Memphis for the day. James stood at the graveside holding a small stuffed bunny he'd bought for Grace's homecoming. He was supposed to throw dirt on the tiny white casket, but he couldn't make his hands work. Hank took the shovel from him and finished the job. At home that evening, Mary sat James down at their kitchen table. We need to talk, she said. James looked at his wife, really looked at her for the first time since Grace died. She lost weight, but not the weight of grief. She looked lighter somehow, like a burden had been lifted. What about? About us. About our marriage. About what happens now. What do you mean, what happens now? We grieve our daughter. We try to heal. We figure out how to live without her. Mary shook her head. I can't do that, James. I can't stay married to you and pretend everything's okay. Pretend? Grace just died. Nothing's okay. Grace died because of you, Mary said quietly. Because of your family. Your genes. James felt the words hit him like a sledgehammer. What are you talking about? The genetic condition. Dr. Wells explained it to me. It's inherited through the father's line. If we'd never gotten married, if I'd never had a baby with you, Grace would still be alive. Mary, that's not. It is. The metabolic disorder comes from your side of the family. Your grandfather died young. Your father died young. There's bad blood in your family, James, and it killed our daughter. James stared at his wife, trying to process what she was saying. You're blaming me for Grace's death? I'm stating facts. Grace inherited a genetic defect from you that killed her. If she'd had different genes, different parents, she'd be alive right now. You're grieving. You're not thinking clearly. I'm thinking perfectly clearly. I want a divorce, James. I want to end this marriage before we make any more mistakes. The word divorce hung in the air between them like a curse. James felt something fundamental break inside his chest. Mary, please. We just lost our daughter. Don't do this now. When would be a better time? After I get pregnant again and have to worry about whether this baby will die too? After we go through this nightmare again? We could see specialists, genetic counselors. There might be treatments. I don't want treatments. I don't want to spend my life managing genetic defects and metabolic disorders and watching my children die because of bad genes. So you want to throw away 5 years of marriage because our daughter got sick? I want to have a future that doesn't include watching babies die. Mary's voice was calm, practical, like she was discussing grocery shopping instead of ending their marriage. James realized this wasn't a grief-fueled decision. She'd thought about it, planned it, maybe even decided before Grace died. There's someone else, he said. It wasn't a question. Mary's face flushed, but her voice stayed steady. That's not what this is about, isn't it? All those errands and phone calls and times you couldn't be found. All those conversations with Dr. Wells that went beyond doctor and patient. You're paranoid. Am I? Because right now you sound like a woman who's already checked out of this marriage and is just looking for an excuse to leave. Mary stood up from the table. I've already talked to a lawyer. The papers will be filed next week. Mary, I'm staying at my sister's tonight. I'll be back tomorrow to pack my things. She left James sitting at their kitchen table, staring at the salt and pepper shakers Mary's mother had given them as a wedding gift. In one afternoon, he'd lost his daughter and his wife. Everything he'd built his life around was gone. Hank found him there 3 hours later, still sitting at the table with the lights off. Hey, Hank said quietly. How are you doing? She's leaving me. What? Mary. She wants a divorce. Says Grace died because of my genes, because I come from bad stock. Hank sat down across from James. That's bullshit. Is it? Dad died at 35. Grandfather died at 41. Maybe there is something wrong with our family. Dad died in a car accident. Grandfather died of a heart attack. Neither of those things is genetic. Dr. Wells said Grace had a metabolic disorder. Dr. Wells said a lot of things. That doesn't make them true. James looked at his brother. You think he was lying? I think something about this whole situation stinks. Mary's acting like a woman who's relieved instead of devastated. And that doctor was way too friendly with your wife for my comfort. You think Mary was having an affair? I think Mary's been looking for an excuse to leave you for months, and Grace's death gave her one. Hank's words confirmed what James had been thinking but hadn't wanted to face. Mary hadn't loved him for a long time. Maybe she never really loved him at all. What am I going to do? James asked. You're going to let her go. You're going to grieve your daughter. And then you're going to build a new life that doesn't include people who abandon you when things get hard. Mary moved out 2 days later. She took half of everything. Furniture, savings, even the car. James didn't fight her. He was too broken to care about material possessions. The divorce was final within 6 months. Mary claimed the house was too painful to live in. So James bought out her half with money from his 401k. He couldn't afford it, But he couldn't bear the thought of strangers living in the place where Grace had been conceived and dreamed about. Mary remarried 8 months later. A real estate agent named Evan Pritchard who drove a BMW and lived in one of the expensive subdivisions south of Nashville. James heard about it from mutual friends who thought he should know. He didn't care. Mary was part of his past now, along with Grace and the life he'd planned and all the dreams that had died with his daughter. James moved through the next 5 years like a man underwater. He worked, paid his bills, visited Grace's grave on her birthday and the anniversary of her death. He never dated, never considered remarrying, never thought about having more children. Hank worried about him. "You can't live like this forever," he said. "Grace wouldn't want you to give up on happiness." But James wasn't giving up on happiness. He'd simply accepted that happiness wasn't meant for everyone. Some people got love and family and all the things that made life worth living. Others got work and solitude and the quiet satisfaction of surviving one day at a time. He'd made peace with which category he belonged to, until the phone call that changed everything. The call came on a Tuesday morning in March, 5 years after Grace died. James was replacing a heat pump at a medical office when his phone rang. "Mr. Renard? This is Linda Davidson from Nashville General Hospital. I'm calling about your daughter, Grace." James nearly dropped his wrench. Nobody had called him about Grace in 5 years. "What about her?" "We've been conducting a review of archive cases as part of a quality improvement initiative. Your daughter's case has been flagged for further investigation." "What kind of investigation? I prefer to discuss this in person. Could you come to the hospital this afternoon?" Something in the woman's voice made James's hand shake. "Is this about the medical care she received?" "Please, Mr. Renard, this is important. Can you be here at 3? James finished the heat pump installation on autopilot, his mind racing. Why would the hospital be reviewing Grace's case? What could they have found after 5 years? Nashville General looked exactly the same as it had the day Grace died. Same beige walls, same smell of disinfectant and despair, same feeling of barely controlled chaos. James found Linda Davidson in the medical records department, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and tired eyes. "Thank you for coming," she said, leading him to a small conference room. "I know this must be difficult. What's this about?" Linda opened a thick file folder. "We've been digitizing old records and training our staff on new protocols for documenting patient care. As part of that process, we review certain cases that may not have been handled according to current standards. In Grace's case, your daughter's case was flagged because of discrepancies in the medical records." James felt cold settling in his stomach. "What kind of discrepancies?" "The official cause of death was listed as complications from a rare genetic metabolic disorder. But when we ran the records through our new quality assurance protocols, several red flags appeared." Linda pulled out a laboratory report. The genetic tests that were supposedly conducted on Grace all came back negative. Every single one. There's no evidence that she had any kind of metabolic disorder. James stared at the papers. "Then what killed her?" "The blood work shows elevated potassium levels. Dangerously elevated. Levels that would cause exactly the kind of organ failure and cardiac arrest that Grace experienced." "Potassium? I don't understand." "Potassium is a mineral that regulates heart rhythm and muscle function. Too much potassium can cause fatal cardiac arrhythmias. But it's not something that occurs naturally in healthy infants." The room seemed to spin around James. "Are you saying someone gave Grace potassium?" "I'm saying the medical evidence doesn't support the official cause of death. And there's something else you need to see." Linda pulled out a tablet and queued up a video file. "This is security footage from the NICU from the night Grace died." The video showed a hospital corridor at 1:42 a.m. according to the timestamp. A figure in dark clothing walked purposefully down the hallway, checking room numbers. When the person turned their head toward the camera, James felt his world tilt sideways. "Mary, that's my ex-wife," James said. "We know." She entered Grace's room at 1:43 a.m. and stayed for 14 minutes. Grace went into cardiac arrest at 4:17 a.m. James watched his ex-wife disappear into Grace's room, then emerge 14 minutes later, walking quickly toward the exit. She kept her head down, avoiding the cameras. "Why are you showing me this now? Why did you wait 5 years?" Linda's face flushed with embarrassment. One of our nurses came forward last month. She was working that night and saw your ex-wife in the NICU. She was told by hospital administration not to report it. Told not to report it. There were concerns about publicity, legal liability, the hospital's reputation. The administration decided it was better to accept the official diagnosis and move on. James felt rage building in his chest, hot and poisonous. So you covered it up. The hospital made a decision that we now recognize was wrong. That's why we're conducting this review, why we're being transparent with families who may have been affected. Affected? My daughter was murdered, and you covered it up to protect your reputation. Mr. Renard, I understand your anger. Do you? Do you understand that I spent 5 years thinking I killed my daughter with bad genes? Do you understand that my wife divorced me because she blamed me for Grace's death? Do you understand that my entire life was destroyed by a lie? Linda looked down at her hands. The nurse who came forward, Nora Wynn, is willing to speak with you. She has information about what she observed that night. What kind of information? She saw your ex-wife leaving Grace's room around 2 a.m., and she overheard a conversation between your ex-wife and Dr. Wells the day before Grace died. Dr. Wells. James had almost forgotten about the pediatrician who'd been so attentive during Grace's birth and hospital stay. What did she overhear? Ms. Wynn can explain that better than I can. Here's her contact information. Linda handed James a slip of paper with a phone number. Mr. Renard, I want you to know that the hospital takes full responsibility for the failures in this case. We're prepared to discuss financial compensation. I don't want her money, James said, standing up. I want the truth. James called Nora Wynn from the hospital parking lot. I've been expecting your call, she said. Can you meet me tonight? I get off work at 7. I'll be there. Nora lived in a small apartment complex near the hospital. James found her on her balcony, smoking a cigarette with trembling hands. She was younger than he'd expected, maybe early 40s, with prematurely gray hair and haunted eyes. I should have said something 5 years ago, she said without preamble. I've regretted staying silent every day since. Why didn't you? I was young, scared of losing my job. The head of pediatrics called me into his office the morning after Grace died. Told me that the family was grieving and didn't need additional trauma. Said that reporting what I'd seen would only cause more pain for everyone involved. What exactly did you see? Nora took a long drag from her cigarette. I was doing my 2 a.m. rounds, checking on all the babies. When I got to Grace's room, I saw your wife coming out. She looked panicked, guilty. When she saw me, she said she couldn't sleep and wanted to check on her baby. Did you believe her? No. Visiting hours had been over for hours. Security should have stopped her at the front desk. But she knew Dr. Wells personally, and I'd seen them together before, so I figured she had special permission. Together before? What do you mean? Nora stubbed out her cigarette. Your wife and Dr. Wells were having an affair. I saw them together multiple times during her pregnancy. Not just medical consultations, personal meetings. They were very careful, but hospital staff noticed things. James felt pieces clicking into place in his mind. Mary's mysterious errands. The long phone calls. Her comfort level with Dr. Wells during Grace's birth. Did you ever hear them talking? Once. The day before Grace died. I was restocking supplies in the family conference room and heard voices. Your wife was crying, upset about something. She said you promised me it wouldn't come back to us. You said nobody would ever know. What did Dr. Wells say? He told her to stay calm, that everything would work out, that the baby would be gone soon and they could be together. The words hit James like a physical blow. The baby would be gone soon. That's when I realized what was happening. They were planning to kill Grace. James gripped the railing of the balcony, his knuckles white. Why Grace? Why kill her? Because Grace wasn't your daughter, Mr. Renard. She was Dr. Wells's daughter. And Mary couldn't let that truth come out. The world seemed to stop spinning. Grace wasn't his daughter. The baby he'd loved with every fiber of his being, the child whose death had destroyed his life, hadn't even been his. How do you know that? Dr. Wells told me afterward when he was trying to convince me to stay quiet. He said the baby's paternity was complicated, that revealing what really happened would destroy multiple families. James sat down heavily in one of the patio chairs. So Mary killed Grace to hide the affair. And Dr. Wells helped her. He falsified the medical records, created a fake genetic disorder, convinced the hospital administration to keep quiet. They made you the scapegoat. And I believed it. For 5 years, I believed I was responsible for my daughter's death. I'm so sorry, Nora said. I should have spoken up. I should have told the truth from the beginning. James looked at this woman who'd carried the weight of his daughter's murder for 5 years. Why are you telling me now? Because I couldn't live with it anymore. Because you deserve to know the truth. And because Mary and Dr. Wells are living their lives like nothing happened while you've been suffering for something you didn't do. James thought about Mary in her expensive house with her wealthy new husband. About Dr. Wells continuing to practice medicine, treating other people's children while having murdered his own. About 5 years of grief and guilt and self-blame that could have been avoided if one person had told the truth. What are you going to do? Nora asked. James didn't answer right away. The rational thing would be to go to the police, file a report, let the criminal justice system handle it. But the police had missed it the first time. The hospital had covered it up. The system had failed Grace completely. I'm going to make sure they pay for what they did, James said finally. Ow! I don't know yet. But Mary and Dr. Wells destroyed my life to save their own. It's time to return the favor. James started with research. He spent the next week learning everything he could about Dr. Adrian Wells. The man was 43 years old, had been practicing pediatric medicine for 15 years. He was married to Rebecca Wells, a former nurse who now stayed home with their 2 children. They lived in Belle Meade, one of Nashville's most exclusive neighborhoods. Dr. Wells had a clean professional record, no malpractice suits or disciplinary actions. He volunteered at free clinics, served on medical boards, was respected by colleagues, and loved by patients' families. On paper, he was everything a pediatrician should be. But James knew the truth. Behind the professional facade was a man who'd murdered a baby to hide an affair. Mary was easier to track. She lived in a gated community in Brentwood with Evan Pritchard, her real estate developer husband. She worked part-time at an upscale boutique, drove a white Lexus, and posted constantly on social media about her perfect life. Looking at her Instagram feed made James's stomach turn. Mary at charity galas, Mary at wine tastings, Mary posing with other wealthy wives in their designer clothes and practice smiles. She looked happy, satisfied, like a woman who'd gotten everything she wanted and never looked back. That was going to change. James started small. Anonymous letters sent to both Mary and Dr. Wells at their workplaces. Nothing threatening, just copies of medical records, timestamps from security footage, questions about discrepancies in Grace's case. He watched their reactions from a distance. Dr. Wells became paranoid, started varying his routine, looked over his shoulder in parking lots. Mary hired a security company to upgrade her house, bought pepper spray for her purse. But they didn't go to the police. Guilty people rarely did. The second phase was more direct. James called Dr. Wells's medical practice, identifying himself as a journalist working on a story about infant mortality rates. I have some questions about a case from 5 years ago, he told the receptionist. Grace Renard. Could Dr. Wells call me back? Wells returned the call within an hour, his voice tight with barely controlled fear. I don't know what you think you know, Wells said, but Grace Renard died from a genetic metabolic disorder. I have the medical records to prove it. According to my sources, those medical records were falsified. The genetic tests were negative. The real cause of death was potassium poisoning. Silence on the line. Dr. Wells, I have no comment. Any further questions should be directed to the hospital's legal department. The line went dead, but James had heard everything he needed to hear. The fear in Wells's voice, the lawyer-coached responses, the immediate deflection to legal counsel. All confirmation that Nora had told him the truth. 2 days later, Mary called him. The first time they'd spoken since the divorce. What do you want? She asked without preamble. I'm sorry. Don't play games, James. I know you're behind the letters, the phone calls to Adrian's office. What do you want? I want the truth. The truth? The truth is that our daughter died from a genetic disorder, and you spent 5 years trying to blame everyone else instead of accepting reality. The truth is that you murdered her. The silence stretched for nearly a minute. When Mary spoke again, Her voice was different. Harder. You can't prove anything. Not denial. Not shock or outrage or confusion. Just a cold calculation about evidence and proof. I have security footage of you entering Grace's room the night she died. I have witness testimony about your affair with Dr. Wells. I have medical records that show Grace didn't have any genetic disorders. You have circumstantial evidence and conspiracy theories. No prosecutor would touch a case like that. Maybe, but the court of public opinion has a lower burden of proof than criminal court. What's that supposed to mean? It means people don't like child killers, Mary. Even rich, pretty ones who think they're untouchable. Mary's laugh was bitter. You think you can destroy my life? I'm married to one of the wealthiest men in Nashville. I have lawyers, connections, resources you can't even imagine. And I have the truth. Let's see which one is stronger. James hung up and immediately called Rebecca Torres, an investigative reporter for the Nashville scene who specialized in medical malpractice and institutional cover-ups. I have a story for you, he said, about a murdered baby and a conspiracy to cover it up. They met the next day at a coffee shop in East Nashville. Rebecca was a woman in her 30s with intelligent eyes and the aggressive curiosity of someone who'd made a career out of exposing lies. This is explosive, she said, reviewing the documents James had brought. If this is accurate, we're talking about murder and conspiracy at one of Nashville's most prestigious hospitals. Can you verify it independently? I can try, but I'll need more sources. Hospital employees willing to go on record, documentation that proves the cover-up. These institutions protect themselves aggressively. What about Norwin? She's willing to talk. One nurse isn't enough. I need corroboration, preferably from multiple sources. And I need someone with direct knowledge of the falsified records. James thought about that. What if I could get Dr. Wells to confess? Ow! Leave that to me. James spent the next week planning his approach. Dr. Wells was paranoid, but not stupid. He wouldn't confess to murder over the phone or in a public place. But he might be more forthcoming if he thought he was talking to someone who could help him. James created a fake email account and sent Wells a message identifying himself as a lawyer who specialized in medical malpractice defense. I understand you may be facing questions about a case from 2018, the email read. I've successfully defended doctors in similar situations. We should talk. Wells responded within hours, agreeing to meet at a restaurant in Green Hills the following evening. James arrived early and set up his phone to record the conversation. When Wells walked in, he looked older than his 43 years. Stress had aged him, put lines around his eyes and gray in his hair. Mr. Morrison? Wells said, sitting down across from James. Dr. Wells, thank you for meeting with me. I have to be honest, I'm not sure I need a lawyer yet. This whole thing might blow over. What whole thing? Wells leaned forward, lowering his voice. Someone's been asking questions about a patient who died 5 years ago, sending anonymous letters, making phone calls. I think it's the baby's father trying to stir up trouble. What kind of trouble? He's claiming the baby was murdered, that the medical records were falsified. It's complete nonsense, but people hear the word murder and they start asking questions. James kept his expression neutral. Were the medical records falsified? Wells hesitated just long enough to confirm James's suspicions. Of course not. The baby died from a rare genetic disorder. I have the documentation to prove it. But hypothetically, if medical records have been altered to hide something, what would be your legal exposure? Hypothetically, criminal charges for falsifying medical documents, loss of medical license, civil liability for malpractice. And if someone actually died because of the falsification, Wells trailed off. Murder charges, potentially, but that's not what happened here. Grace Renard died from natural causes. Grace. That was the baby's name. Wells nodded. Sweet little girl. Premature, but otherwise healthy until the genetic disorder manifested. It was tragic, but not criminal. You seem to remember the case very well for something that happened 5 years ago. Some cases stick with you, especially when the family has been through so much tragedy already. What kind of tragedy? Wells realized he'd said too much. I should go. This whole meeting was probably a mistake. Dr. Wells, if you're innocent, then you have nothing to worry about. But if there's more to this story, it's better to get ahead of it. These things have a way of coming out eventually. Wells sat back down, his hands shaking slightly. What if the medical records had been adjusted to spare the family additional pain? What do you mean? What if the baby died from something that would have caused even more anguish for the parents? Something that would have destroyed their marriage, their lives, their entire sense of reality. James felt his pulse quicken. Like what? Like the baby not being the husband's child. Like the mother having an affair and needing to hide the paternity. Are you saying Grace Renard wasn't James Renard's daughter? Wells nodded slowly. She was mine. Mary Renard and I had been having an affair for months. When Grace was born premature, we knew there would be questions. DNA tests, genetic screenings. The truth would have come out. So you killed her? No. Wells's voice was sharp. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Mary was supposed to confess to James, let him decide whether to raise another man's child. But Mary panicked. She said she'd rather die than lose her comfortable life. So she killed Grace instead. She came to the hospital that night, and she gave Grace an injection of potassium chloride. She said it would look like natural causes, that no one would question the death of a premature baby. James struggled to keep his voice steady. And you helped cover it up. I was protecting my own family, my wife, my children. If the affair came out, it would have destroyed them too. So you falsified the medical records. I created a genetic disorder that would explain Grace's symptoms. Made it look hereditary, so James would blame himself instead of digging deeper into the real cause of death. Wells put his head in his hands. I've regretted it every day for 5 years. But what's done is done. We can't bring Grace back. No, James said quietly. But we can make sure justice is served. Wells looked up, confused. I'm sorry. James pulled out his phone, stopped the recording. Dr. Adrian Wells, you just confessed to conspiracy to commit murder and falsifying medical records. I'm not a lawyer, Dr. Wells. I'm James Renard, Grace's father. The color drained from Wells's face. You tricked me. You murdered my daughter and let me believe I was responsible for 5 years. A little deception seems fair. James, please. You have to understand. I understand perfectly. You and Mary decided that your reputations were more important than a baby's life. You killed an innocent child to protect yourselves. Wells stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. If you release the recording, it won't just destroy me. It'll destroy my wife, my children. They're innocent in all this. So is Grace. James, please. I'll do anything. Pay any amount. Just don't destroy my family. Your family. James felt rage building in his chest. You destroyed my family. You let Mary divorce me and take everything because she blamed me for Grace's death. You stood by and watched me suffer for something you did. I'm sorry. Sorry doesn't bring back the dead, Dr. Wells. And it doesn't undo 5 years of hell. James walked out of the restaurant, leaving Wells sitting alone at the table. He had everything he needed now. Wells's confession, Nora's testimony, the medical records that proved the cover-up. It was time to make Mary and Wells pay for what they'd done to Grace. The Nashville Scene article ran 3 days later. The headline read, Hospital Conspiracy, How Medical Staff Covered Up Infant Murder. Rebecca Torres had done her homework. She tracked down 3 hospital employees willing to speak anonymously about pressure to accept false diagnoses without question. She'd obtained copies of the original medical records showing negative genetic tests. She'd even found a former hospital administrator who admitted that the Grace Renard case had been mishandled to protect the institution's reputation. The article didn't directly name Mary or Wells as murderers. Legal caution prevented that, but raised enough questions to demand answers. Why had genetic tests been ignored? Why had elevated potassium levels been overlooked? Why had the hospital discouraged further investigation? By the end of the week, the story had been picked up by every news outlet in Nashville. Television reporters camped outside Wells's medical practice and Mary's boutique. Social media exploded with speculation about corruption and cover-ups at Nashville General. Wells's medical practice released a statement defending his treatment of Grace and expressing confidence that any investigation would vindicate his actions. Mary's lawyer issued a brief comment calling the article irresponsible speculation by disgruntled former employees. But James could see the cracks forming. Wells looked haggard on the evening news, his usual confidence replaced by defensive anger. Mary's social media accounts went dark. Evan Pritchard was spotted meeting with divorce attorneys. The pressure was building. Soon, something would break. James just had to wait and see what broke first. 2 weeks after the article ran, Dr. Wells lost his job. The medical practice couldn't afford the negative publicity, and Wells's partners voted to terminate his employment immediately. His medical license was suspended pending investigation by the Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners. Mary's marriage imploded even faster. Evan Pritchard filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences and undisclosed material facts. Translation: he'd married Mary without knowing she was a potential murderer. The Nashville Police Department announced that they were reopening the Grace Renard case as a potential homicide. Detective Sarah Martinez, a woman in her 40s with a reputation for tenacity, was assigned to lead the investigation. James met with Detective Martinez at police headquarters downtown. She was professional but sympathetic, understanding the unique position he was in as both the victim's father and the primary investigator. "I have to ask," she said, "why didn't you come forward with this information 5 years ago?" "Because I didn't have it 5 years ago. The hospital told me Grace died from a genetic disorder, and I believed them. My wife blamed me for Grace's death, and I believed that too. What changed? The hospital called me last month about discrepancies in Grace's medical records. That led me to Nora Wynn, who told me about the affair and the cover-up. Everything else followed from there." Detective Martinez reviewed the evidence James had gathered: the security footage, Nora's statement, Wells's recorded confession, the falsified medical records. "This is solid," she said. "Enough for arrest warrants, definitely enough for indictments. But I have to warn you, building a murder case 5 years after the fact isn't easy. Physical evidence is gone, memories fade, witnesses disappear. What about Wells's confession? That helps, but defense attorneys will argue he was coerced or lying to protect someone else. We need more." "Like what?" "Like Mary Renard confessing. Like finding physical evidence of the potassium injection. Like discovering other instances where the hospital falsified records." James thought about that. What if I could get Mary to confess? How? She's desperate now. Divorced, broke, facing criminal charges. Desperate people make mistakes. Detective Martinez studied James's face. "Mr. Renard, I appreciate everything you've done to uncover the truth about your daughter's death. But from here on out, this is a police investigation. I can't have civilians conducting unauthorized interviews or trying to entrap suspects." "I understand. Do you? Because if you interfere with our investigation, you could jeopardize the entire case. Mary Renard could walk free because you couldn't wait for us to do our job." James nodded, but privately he had no intention of waiting for the police to solve Grace's murder. They'd had 5 years to figure out and had missed everything. If justice was going to be served, he'd have to serve it himself. That evening, James sat in his living room planning his next move. Mary was vulnerable now, isolated and desperate, but she was also smart and had probably hired the best criminal defense attorney her family's money could buy. He needed leverage, something that would force her to confess, or at least admit what she'd done. Then he remembered the recording device Wells had mentioned. During their conversation at the restaurant, Wells had said Mary knew about recordings he'd made of their conversations. If those recordings still existed, they might contain evidence of the conspiracy. James called Rebecca Torres. "I need a favor," he said. "Can you find out if the police searched Wells's home and office? Specifically, if they found any recording devices or audio files?" "I can check." "Why?" "Wells told me he'd been recording his conversations with Mary. If those recordings exist, they might contain evidence of the conspiracy." Rebecca called back an hour later. "No search warrant has been issued yet. The police are still building their case. But my source says Wells has been destroying evidence, shredding documents, wiping hard drives, clearing out his office." James felt a surge of urgency. If Wells was destroying evidence, the recordings might be gone already. But maybe not all of them. Maybe Wells had been sloppy or hadn't found everything yet. That night, James drove to Belmead and parked across the street from Wells's house. The colonial mansion was dark, except for a light in what looked like a home office. Wells's BMW was in the driveway, but his wife's car was gone. James waited until midnight, then approached the house. The front door was locked, but the side gate to the backyard was open. A sliding glass door led to what appeared to be Wells's study. James had never broken into anyone's home before, but desperation made him bold. He found a spare key under a flower pot, the kind of obvious hiding place that wealthy people used because they never expected to be burglarized. Wells's study was a mess. Papers scattered everywhere, file cabinets standing open, computer equipment stacked in boxes ready for disposal. Wells had definitely been destroying evidence. But in his haste, he'd missed something. A small digital recorder tucked behind a row of medical textbooks on the bookshelf. James pocketed it and left through the same door he'd entered. At home, James connected the recorder to his computer and discovered 12 audio files, each labeled with a date from the past month. All conversations between Wells and Mary. The first few recordings were mundane. Wells trying to convince Mary to stay calm, Mary panicking about the newspaper article. But the final recording, made just 2 days ago, contained exactly what James needed. Mary's voice, cold and threatening. "I don't care what you have to do, Adrian. Confess, run away, kill yourself, I don't care. But if you drag me down with you, I'll make sure your wife and children know exactly what kind of man you really are." Wells, desperate and pleading, "Mary, please. We're both guilty here. We both decided Grace had to die. You decided. You're the one who suggested the potassium. You're the one who said it would look natural. Because you said you'd rather kill yourself than let James find out about the affair. And you offered a better solution. Kill the baby instead. Make it look like a genetic disorder. Blame James and move on with our lives." The recording continued for 10 more minutes, with Mary systematically threatening Wells while he tried to bargain for mercy. By the end, it was clear that Mary had been the driving force behind Grace's murder, and Wells had been a weak accomplice who'd gotten in too deep to back out. James copied the files and called Detective Martinez. "I found something you need to hear," he said. The dominoes fell quickly after Rebecca Torres's article hit the stands. Dr. Adrian Wells lost his medical license within 3 weeks. The Tennessee Board of Medical Examiners ruled that his conduct in covering up Grace's murder constituted gross negligence and moral turpitude. His medical practice terminated his employment immediately, unable to afford the negative publicity that followed him everywhere. His wife Rebecca filed for divorce and moved to Atlanta with their children, refusing to let him see them unsupervised. She'd learned about the affair through the newspaper, along with everyone else in Nashville. Mary's perfect second marriage imploded even faster. Evan Pritchard had kicked her out of their Brentwood mansion within days of the story breaking online. Her substitute teaching job disappeared when parents complained about having a child murderer in their schools. Her friends stopped returning her calls. James watched it all unfold from a distance, feeling neither satisfaction nor regret. This wasn't about revenge. This was about truth. Grace deserved the truth. He never revealed himself as the source of the investigation. He just watched the chaos he'd set in motion tear apart the lives of the people who'd torn apart his. Mary tried to call him, the first time in years. James saw her name on his phone screen and let it go to voicemail. When he played the message back, her voice was different. Desperate. "James, please. We need to talk. Things have gotten out of hand. Call me back." He deleted the message without listening to it again. 2 days later, she showed up at his doorstep. James opened the door to find Mary standing on his porch, looking older than her 36 years. Her blonde hair was darker now, roots showing gray. Her clothes were expensive but wrinkled, like she'd been sleeping in them. "James," she said, "we need to talk." "About what?" "You know what? This whole investigation, the newspaper stories, the recordings. You're behind all of this." James didn't deny it. "Come in." Mary walked into his living room, looked around at the sparse furniture and bare walls. It was the same modest rental house he'd lived in for 5 years, furnished with the basics and nothing more. "You don't understand," Mary said, turning to face him. "I was scared. If people found out, my life would have been over. James looked at his ex-wife with calm eyes. And you made sure mine was. That's not what I meant to do. I was protecting myself. Yes, but I never wanted to hurt you. You let me think I killed our daughter with bad genes. You divorced me and took everything I had because you said Grace died because of my family. Mary's composure began to crack. I was grieving. I wasn't thinking clearly. You were thinking clearly enough to plan her murder. I didn't plan anything. Adrian said what? That killing a baby was the best way to hide your affair. Mary sat down on his couch without being invited. You don't understand what it was like. Being trapped in this little house with your little job and your little dreams. I wanted more than this, James. I deserved more than this. So you had an affair. So I fell in love with someone who could give me the life I wanted. Someone successful, respected, wealthy. Someone who could offer me a future worth having. James studied his ex-wife, amazed by her complete lack of remorse. And when you got pregnant, I hope the baby was yours. I pray it was yours. But when Grace was born early and people started asking questions, Mary shrugged. The truth was going to come out eventually. So you decided to kill her. I decided to protect my future. Grace was going to destroy everything I'd worked for. Grace was a baby, Mary. An innocent baby. Grace was a complication that needed to be resolved. James felt something cold settle in his chest. Mary wasn't just unrepentant. She was proud of what she'd done. I loved her too, Mary said suddenly, her voice rising. Despite everything, I loved Grace. James looked at his ex-wife for a long moment, then spoke quietly. You loved yourself enough to kill her. Mary's face went white. That's not. James walked to the door and opened it. Goodbye, Mary. James, wait. You can't just. He closed the door on her mid-sentence. James stood in his living room, listening to Mary's car start in the driveway, then the sound of tires on gravel as she drove away. He felt nothing. No satisfaction, no regret, no sense of closure. Just emptiness where emotion should have been. A week later, Dr. Adrian Wells was found dead in his Belmead home. The official cause of death was suicide. Wells had locked himself in his home office and taken a lethal dose of fentanyl, something he could easily access through his medical connections. He left no note, but given the investigation closing in around him, the conclusion seemed obvious. James knew better. Detective Martinez called him that afternoon with the details. Wells's phone records show he received multiple calls from Mary Renard in the days before his death, she said. The last call lasted 43 minutes, ending at 11:47 p.m. the night before he died. Did you find anything else? Wells had deleted several voicemails from Mary's number, but our tech team recovered one of them. She was threatening to expose him if he didn't take full responsibility for Grace's murder. What exactly did she say? That she had evidence proving he was the mastermind behind everything. That if he didn't confess and take the blame, she'd make sure his wife and children knew exactly what kind of man he really was. James wasn't surprised. Even facing exposure herself, Mary had found a way to manipulate someone else into taking the fall. So Wells killed himself rather than face prison. That's how it looks. But James... Detective Martinez paused. With Wells dead and no confession from Mary, the case is going to be hard to prosecute. Her lawyers will argue that Wells was the real killer and Mary was just another victim. I understand. The district attorney thinks he can make a case, but it'll take time. Months, maybe years. James thanked Detective Martinez and hung up. He didn't care about prosecuting Mary anymore. She was alone now, truly alone, and that was justice enough. That evening, James sat at his kitchen table and composed a text message. Truth always finds its way home. He sent it to Mary's number and turned off his phone. Months later, James stood at Grace's grave on what would have been her 6th birthday. The headstone was simple gray granite with her name, dates, and a small engraving of a stuffed bunny. Grace Renard, loved then lost. James knelt and placed a small bouquet of daisies against the headstone. Daisies had been his grandmother's favorite flower. Simple, honest, unpretentious. You were innocent, he said quietly, and now the world knows. A warm breeze stirred the trees overhead. Nashville was having another stubborn spring, the kind that promised summer was coming, but wasn't quite ready to commit. James pulled the small stuffed bunny from his jacket pocket. The same one he brought to the hospital 7 years ago. The one he'd planned to give Grace when she was old enough to play with toys. He placed it carefully next to the headstone. "I brought you something," he said. "I know you can't play with it now, but maybe wherever you are, you'll know it's from me." James stood up and brushed dirt from his knees. The cemetery was quiet except for the distant sound of traffic and the whisper of wind through the trees. For 7 years, James had carried the weight of believing he'd caused his daughter's death. Now he carried the weight of knowing the truth, that Grace had died because her mother was selfish and her biological father was weak, and the world was sometimes cruel beyond understanding. But he also carried something else, the absolute certainty that Grace had been innocent. She'd done nothing wrong, hurt no one, deserved none of what happened to her. In a world full of compromise and moral ambiguity, Grace's memory remained pure. James walked back to his truck without looking back. He didn't forgive. He didn't forget. But for the first time in 7 years, he could breathe. The truth had found its way home at last.